Do you often feel powerless to change your own situation? Do you often feel tired because of complex interpersonal relationships? Do you always find yourself in a state of inferiority or misery? Do you feel that happiness is far away from you? How far a person can go depends on who they accompany. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to share the book, The Courage to be Disliked. This book presents Adler's philosophical ideas in the form of a debate. It helps people free themselves from the three common bindings: their past relationships, their future, and their own self-perception. Those who have read this book find it enlightening and exhilarating. This book, in a way that subverts people's cognition, tells us that the world is incredibly simple. From this moment on, we can bring about change. Everyone can achieve freedom and happiness without exception. All we need is the courage to change. Adler is one of the three great giants of psychology, alongside Freud and Jung. Speaking of psychology, everyone knows the famous Freud. The core theory of Freudian psychology is determinism. Freud believes that both our emotions and behavioral habits can be traced back to the past. Our present and even future are determined by past events. In contrast to Freud, Adler's core idea in psychology is teleology. Teleology holds that a person's behavioral habits are primarily determined by the goals they want to achieve. Adler believes that the meaning we attribute to any past experience is a choice we make ourselves. In other words, we choose the meaning of our experiences based on certain goals. Freud believes that human destiny is determined by our biological instincts, while Adler emphasizes the influence of social factors on people. He believes that each of us is not determined by instinct or trapped by the past. Although past experiences have a significant impact on us, we can completely redefine the past and achieve self-improvement and the desired life and happiness through our own efforts. Adler has influenced many subsequent thinkers and authors like Dale Carnegie, a master of interpersonal relationships, praised Adler as a great psychologist who dedicated his life to studying human potential. In Carnegie's works, we can see many Adlerian ideas. Adler was born in 1870, far away from us in terms of time, but his ideas were remarkably forward-looking and can still guide us today. They are not outdated at all. The Courage to be Disliked is a book that unfolds through debates between a young man and a philosopher. The entire book tells the story of a young man who lacks confidence and is constantly troubled. He comes to the philosopher with complaints and doubts. After 5 nights of deep conversations, the young man finally has a breakthrough and finds enlightenment. The doubts he had were actually the doubts of most of us. Adler's psychology liberates us from past experiences, interpersonal relationships, and the future. When we break free from these constraints, we will realize that we have always been free. What truly holds us back is ourselves. Next, let's explore the courage to be disliked together. Let's bring our own worries, doubts, and curiosity, along with the young man in the book, to knock on the door of the philosopher's library. When we walk out of this session and look around, we will feel that the world is refreshing and it will become much better. Let's delve into Adler's teleology and explore the dialogues between the young man and the philosopher. The philosopher says, "The world is extremely simple. Everyone can change. Everyone can achieve happiness without exception." After hearing the philosopher's assertions, the young man finds it nothing more than utopian idealism. He thinks that perhaps only children see the world this way. They have no material pressures, and their parents' care shields them from the ugliness of the world, filling them with boundless hope for the future. But as soon as people grow up, they face numerous constraints: work, family, and everything else. Even social problems like discrimination, war, or class divisions that they couldn't understand as children become unavoidable. In such circumstances, how can the philosopher advocate that the world is extremely simple? The philosopher says, "The world is not complex and chaotic. It is you who perceive the world as complex. We live in our subjective worlds. The world you see is different from what I see. It's different from what anyone else sees. Have you ever drunk water from a well? The temperature of well water is constant. It remains at 18 degrees Celsius year-round. But when you drink well water in the summer, it feels cool, while in the winter, it feels warm and comforting. This is not an illusion caused by environmental changes. The fact that the temperature of the well water is 18 degrees is undeniable, and the feeling of warmth or coolness is also real. The fact is that, in your eyes, the world appears chaotic, but if you undergo a change within yourself, the world will become simple. The young man responds, "So you're shifting the focus to self-change." Well, it's true that people hope for change, but most of them can't achieve it. I have a friend who has been hiding in his house for years and never goes outside. He also desires to live a normal life like everyone else. He wants to change, but as soon as he steps out of the room, he immediately experiences anxiety, shortness of breath, and trembling hands and feet. It seems to be a symptom of anxiety disorder. The cause of this could be a strained relationship with his parents, or the psychological trauma from setbacks at school or in the workplace. Whatever the reason may be, he can't go outside because of it. How can the philosopher help him change in such a situation? After hearing this, the philosopher says, what you're essentially saying is that your friend can't go outside because of some past reasons. In other words, you believe that the current result is determined by past causes. But if we constantly focus on past causes and explain everything based on them, the conclusion we reach is that our present and even our future are entirely determined by past events and are unchangeable. If you truly think that way, then your friend will never be able to step out again. But I want to tell you that Adler believes that what determines our self is not the experiences themselves, but the meaning we assign to those experiences. For example, encountering a major disaster or suffering abuse during childhood does have an impact on the formation of one's personality, but it doesn't necessarily determine the specific outcome. We determine our own lives and the meaning we give to our past experiences. It's not something given by others. It's our own choice. We decide how to live. As for your friend, he is not unable to go outside because of anxiety. The situation is actually the opposite. He doesn't want to go outside in the first place. He has a purpose of not going out, and then he generates feelings of anxiety or fear. I'm not saying he's faking his illness. His trembling hands, shortness of breath, and chest tightness are all real. But these symptoms are created to serve the purpose of not going out. The philosopher continues to explain to the young man, if your friend believes that he can't adapt to society because of parental abuse, it means that he already has an internal motive that leads him to believe this way. The most direct purpose is not going outside. By constantly staying indoors, he can make his parents worry about him and he can receive their careful attention. On the other hand, once he steps out of the room, he becomes just an ordinary individual in the vast sea of people, no longer receiving the same level of attention as before. These are common psychological factors that everyone experiences. Your friend is dissatisfied and also not happy. But he is indeed acting with a purpose, and not just him. All of us live with some purpose. This is teleology, which the young man mentioned earlier is determinism, and what the philosopher said is teleology in Adlerian psychology. Adler says any experience itself is not the fundamental cause of a person's success or failure. We are not forever unhappy because of the harm we suffered in our experiences. In fact, we find factors in our own experiences that align with our current purpose. So everything that happened in the past is just an objective fact, like the well water at 18 degrees Celsius. On the other hand, perceiving warmth or coolness from the past is a subjective feeling in the present. No matter what happened in the past, the meaning it presents is entirely assigned by ourselves. If we constantly rely on determinism, we will be stuck and never progress. But if we believe in teleology, we can immediately bring about change. Emotions are also fabricated. After listening to the philosopher, the young man still feels unable to fully accept it, so he continues to ask, "Yesterday I was alone in a coffee shop, reading a book, and the waiter accidentally spilled coffee on my clothes. So I couldn't help it, and got furious at the waiter. This is clearly because the waiter made a mistake and caused my anger." How does this teleological explanation work? The philosopher says, according to Adler, you felt offended by someone, and you wanted to intimidate the waiter who made a mistake, so you fabricated the emotion of anger as a corresponding means. If the waiter was a beautiful young woman, and you were instantly attracted to her, what kind of emotion would you display? You would probably be charming and go and console the waiter, because you had a purpose of leaving a good impression on this beautiful young woman. So, you would choose a different emotional expression. In other words, even when someone offends us, The emotion we show is determined by ourselves. When we abandon determinism and believe in teleology, we can use teleology to try to adjust our emotions. Change has already happened in this moment. All unhappiness is our own choice. Adler says, being able to accept ourselves happily is a prerequisite for positive change and a key to achieving happiness. It's not important what fate has given us, but rather the meaning we assign to those things ourselves and how we make good use of what we have been given. We might all think, I wish I were born into a wealthy family like others, or I wish I looked as handsome as others, and then complain about the unfairness of the world, regretting our own misfortune. In fact, the reason we want to become someone else is what Adler calls our excessive focus on what has been given to us. Instead, we should pay attention to how to make the best use of what has been given to us. For example, being born into a poor family is an objective fact, but this person sees being in a poor family as a motivation to strive for success, which encourages continuous improvement and a greater appreciation for their current life. This is the meaning they assign to what fate has given them. To this, the philosopher adds a harsh statement. He says, the reason you feel unhappy right now is because you have chosen unhappiness for yourself, and it's not because you were born unhappy. This seemingly unbelievable statement can be understood as follows. When the philosopher says we choose unhappiness for ourselves, it means that we believe the unhappiness we experienced has shaped our current situation, and that is our own choice. When we complain about not being born into a wealthy family, we are also believing we are victims of poverty. When we complain about not being as attractive as others, we are finding a perfect excuse for not achieving our desires. People's complaints are genuine, and people's unhappiness is also truly their own choice. The meaning assigned to past experiences, whether fortunate or unfortunate, is our own choice. It is undeniable that these past experiences have a profound impact on our future. But the key is not in the past, it's in the present, in how we view our past experiences, and how we perceive the things we have experienced. This is something we can choose for ourselves, and how we view our past experiences will determine what actions we take next. This is the key to our present and future. From a teleological perspective, most of us complain about the misfortunes we have experienced because we have secretly made a decision not to change. We believe that maintaining the status quo is easier and more comforting. This brings us back to the key word, courage. Changing our way of life requires great courage, and obtaining time, money, and opportunities all begin with courage. You want to maintain a sport for a healthier life. You want to strive once, to pursue your own career, to see another possibility in life. But do you have the courage to change and pursue happiness? Have you truly decided to change? Many people lack the courage because they have already subconsciously decided not to change. So they would say, if I had time, I could go to the gym. If I had money, I could travel to the places I want to see. If I had the opportunity, I could pursue the career I desire. In fact, all of this has nothing to do with time, money, or opportunities. It is only related to courage and decisions. Or in other words, obtaining more time, money, and opportunities all begin with having the courage. Believing in teleology allows us to believe that we can change. We can choose our own way of life at any time. The reason we cannot change is actually because we keep deciding not to change. We lack the courage to choose a new life, and thus, we lack the courage for happiness. That's why we don't believe it. Although these words may be difficult to accept at first, they are indeed facts. No matter what happened in our previous lives, it does not determine how we will spend our future. How we perceive the things we have experienced decides our present and future. Adler's viewpoints that subvert people's cognition may be difficult for many people to fully accept when they first hear them, and there may be many doubts. But let's continue to explore. The young man came to the philosopher's study as promised after a week. He brought new questions, and the philosopher will thoroughly analyze the relationships between people using Adler's teleological perspective. The young man said to the philosopher, "Sir, you told me that being able to accept oneself happily is a prerequisite for positive change and a key to attaining happiness. But I truly cannot find a reason to like myself. I really lack self-confidence and hold a pessimistic attitude towards everything. I also care a lot about others' opinions. My life feels unnatural, like acting. Furthermore, I am not satisfied with my physique and appearance. I dislike myself. According to your teleological perspective, how do you explain this? The philosopher said, I see, regardless of the facts. The question is, why do you have these feelings of inferiority? The reason you only see your own shortcomings is because you have made a decision not to like yourself. Let me give you an example of someone else. There was a girl who came to seek my help. She had social anxiety, which made her face turn red and shy when talking to others. She said that once she cured this condition, she would confess her feelings to her crush. So the underlying meaning was that she wanted to pursue love. But first, she needed to cure her condition. However, I told her that my judgment was not like that. The truth is, she needed the symptom of blushing. What she feared the most was not the blushing itself, but the rejection and self-denial that would come from her crush. As long as she had the symptom of blushing, she could use the excuse of her social anxiety to avoid facing reality, and she could also live in the fantasy of, if I cure my condition, I can be with my crush. You see, the girl's blushing was the excuse she created for herself. The young man asked, so, how did you help her in the end? Did you just leave her problem aside after listening to her worries? The philosopher said, she lacked self-confidence and believed that if she confessed his feelings to the other person, she would definitely be rejected. She was very afraid that if that happened, it would hurt her self-confidence even more. That's why she manifested the symptoms of blushing and fear. What I could do was to help her accept herself as she is now and give her the courage to move forward, regardless of the outcome. Yes, courage once again. Once, when she went out with friends, that boy was also there. It is said that in the end, the boy took the initiative to confess his feelings and asked for a relationship. Of course, after that, she never came to me again. I don't know what happened to her blushing and fear, but I believe she no longer needs them. At least the young lady can be sure that she no longer needs them, right? The philosopher continued, yes, that's right. So let's use his story to think about your problem. You said that you only see your own flaws and can't find a reason to like yourself. Then you also mentioned that no one wants to deal with difficult and troublesome people like yourself, right? Do you understand? Why do you make yourself only see flaws and dislike yourself? It's because you are excessively afraid of being disliked by others and getting hurt in interpersonal relationships. Just like someone with blushing and fear, they fear being rejected by the opposite sex. You too worry about being invalidated, afraid of being mocked, rejected, and hurting your own heart. So you think it's better not to have any involvement with others from the beginning, rather than getting caught in such a disadvantageous situation. In other words, your goal is to avoid being hurt in interpersonal relationships. And this situation is actually very common. It's like how students often think that if they get into a better university, their life will surely be bright and smooth. Office workers also think that if they hadn't chosen their current industry, they would have had better income. Even if these desires were truly fulfilled, does life really turn out the way we imagine it to be? In most cases, it's not. So what we can do is to accept ourselves as we are now, regardless of the outcome, and give ourselves the courage to move forward. The young man was taken aback by the philosopher's words because he saw a truth that he had been unwilling to face all along. According to Adler, in order to avoid being hurt in interpersonal relationships, which is impossible, one must first accept the fact that all our troubles come from these relationships. Let's imagine an extreme scenario. If there were only you in the universe, would you feel lonely? The answer is actually no, because loneliness doesn't exist when there is only one person. Loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but from feeling estranged and abandoned by others, society, or the imagined community. That's when you truly feel lonely. To experience loneliness, there must be the presence of others. A person can only be called a person in the context of social relationships. So if there were only you in the world, would you feel troubled? We might think that besides interpersonal relationships, there are also inherent distress and anguish that arise from within an individual. But Adler believes that such so-called internal distress actually doesn't exist at all. If there were only one person in the world, all judgments of right and wrong, good and evil, beauty and ugliness would be determined by that person. Without points of reference or comparisons, even pain, illness, and death couldn't be called troubles. Adler's most representative work is The Psychology of Inferiority and Striving for Superiority. The book is named so because the concept of inferiority is at the core of Adlerian psychology. He says that inferiority is the foundation of human culture. Everyone wants to surpass and overcome this sense of inferiority, which is why inferiority drives us to progress. We might think that successful individuals in society, like entrepreneurs such as Elon Musk or big celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio, would never feel inferior. However, Adler asserts that everyone experiences a sense of inferiority. In individual psychology, feeling inferior is not a derogatory term. It is a neutral term. Everyone needs to have it, and everyone wants to compensate for this feeling by pursuing a sense of superiority that makes them feel better. According to Adler, the pursuit of a particular sense of superiority is related to a person's individual sense of inferiority. He gives an example. Many doctors have experienced the death of family members when they were young, which generates a sense of inferiority and the belief that life is unsafe. To compensate for this inferiority, they choose to become doctors and confront death, thus achieving a sense of superiority. It could be pursuing a prosperous life or longing for spiritual freedom. The methods one adopts to compensate for inferiority and achieve superiority reflect their character, or, according to Adler, their attitude towards life. In individual psychology, feelings of inferiority are like the engine that provides the driving force from behind, while feelings of superiority are like the locomotive that pulls you forward. Together, they provide the motivation to transcend oneself. However, once feelings of inferiority become excessive, they no longer provide motivation. Instead, a person becomes negative, thinking they are worthless. This is no longer just inferiority. It is called an inferiority complex, a negative emotion. We often hear people complaining about how they can't succeed because of their low education, or how they can't have a happy marriage because they are not attractive. This constant emphasis on "I can't achieve B because of A" is a typical inferiority complex. Why is this so? We used to think that there was a causal relationship between education and success, appearance and marriage. In our society, it seems to be a social reality that people with higher education are more likely to succeed. But if we believe that this is an inevitable causal connection, then it is not just a problem of our inability to succeed, but rather a lack of desire for success. If we feel inferior about our education, it will prompt us to compensate for our shortcomings by diligently studying and working hard. However, if the inferiority complex continues to develop, it leads to another special psychological state called a superiority complex. What does a superiority complex mean? It means that when a person lacks the courage to change themselves through effort and growth and cannot accept their own shortcomings, they compensate in a more straightforward and crude manner. They will present themselves as outstanding and immerse themselves in a false sense of superiority. In other words, the more arrogant a person is, the more inferior they actually feel. For example, someone may boast about being a powerful figure, claiming to be a leader or a famous person, thus highlighting their distinctiveness by emphasizing their power. There are also behaviors like exaggerating their resume or excessively pursuing branded clothing, which are all manifestations of a superiority complex. These people, relying on external forces to elevate themselves, ultimately live according to others' values, leading lives that are not their own. Regarding the superiority complex, there is one more complex example called boasting about misfortune. These are individuals who delight in or even boast about various misfortunes they have experienced or their growth process. In our culture, the weak have great privileges. The most typical example is a baby who dominates adults through their weakness and is not under anyone's control. Those who boast and use their misfortunes to show how special they are can be seen as giant infants. When we use misfortune as a weapon, we will always need misfortune, and misfortune will naturally accompany us. Life is not a competition with others. Humans driven by a sense of inferiority constantly pursue superiority. One crucial point that needs to be emphasized is that the pursuit of superiority is not about competing with others. It is about surpassing oneself, not about being better than others. To be better than others, we often compare ourselves to the people around us. This often makes us feel uncomfortable. For example, if a person earns an extra billion this month like Jeff Bezos, he won't necessarily be extremely happy. But if his neighbor next door earns a lot more money, it will make him feel uneasy. Adler says, a healthy sense of inferiority does not come from comparing oneself to others, but only from comparing oneself to the ideal self. When we compare ourselves to others, thoughts like, I'm better than this person, or I'm worse than that person, arise, and the complexes of inferiority and superiority come along with it. At this point, for us, everyone else becomes a competitor, even an enemy. As long as we are deeply immersed in competition, there will never be a moment of peace, because in order to not be defeated, we must always win. Many people have achieved social success, but still feel unhappy because they live in a state of competition. In their eyes, the whole world is filled with enemies. But in reality, do people really pay so much attention to us? Is there someone constantly watching us, eagerly looking for an opportunity to attack us? Actually, not at all. We may notice a few blemishes on our face, feel that our legs are too thick, waist too round, hairstyle not quite right, but the harsh reality is that we are not that important to others. We might feel embarrassed all day because our outfit doesn't match, but others won't even notice. Even if we were to randomly do a dance on the street, only a few people would glance at us. A person cannot sincerely wish for the happiness of seemingly happy people, because they view interpersonal relationships as competition. Seeing others' happiness as their own defeat, they are unable to offer blessings. Once we break free from the competition mindset, there is no need to surpass others, and we can free ourselves from the anxiety of potential loss, genuinely wishing well for others, and even actively contributing to their happiness. When someone finds themselves in a difficult situation, the person who always wants to lend a helping hand to them becomes a partner to us. So by stepping out of the competition, our perceived competitors become partners, and we no longer need to live in suspicion. The environment becomes safe and comfortable. The troubles of interpersonal relationships greatly diminish. To be free means not living up to the expectations of others. In another conversion between the young man and the philosopher, their topic starts with freedom. How can we truly attain freedom? When freedom is mentioned, many people think of money. There's a saying that money is forged. Freedom. With enough money, I won't have to go to work anymore. I can do whatever I want, and that means I am free, right? Our society exaggerates the desire for money, and also exaggerates the happiness that money can bring. The philosopher says that even if you have immense wealth, but cannot find love, don't have genuine friends, and your family is not harmonious, that is not true freedom. These troubles cannot be eliminated by material wealth. So if all troubles come from interpersonal relationships, then the shackles that make us feel unfree also come from others. Adler tells us to let go of the pursuit of approval. For example, from parents, elders, friends, colleagues, or leaders. We want to gain the approval of people around us, and therefore have to follow their advice. Let's think about it. Don't we all have this desire for approval? How many people in our lives hurriedly get married and have children due to the pressure from their elders, or work overtime and stay up late because receiving approval from their leaders is more important than their own health? All these choices that make us feel unfree are the pursuit of approval from others. They are satisfying others' expectations. Why do we need to seek approval from others? Because only then can we understand our own worth. Being praised by others can alleviate our sense of inferiority and increase our self-confidence. In Jewish teachings, there is a saying, if we don't live our lives for ourselves, then who will live for us? Actually, all of the above is to explain the meaning of life. It is not about living to fulfill the expectations of others, living solely to seek others' approval. Being concerned about others' opinions means ultimately living in someone else's life. In fact, most unfree individuals live to satisfy others' expectations. The majority of people are troubled and seek to fulfill others' expectations, unable to live according to their own thoughts because they desire recognition too much. As a result, they conform to others' expectations, becoming so eager to abandon your true self and live according to others. Adler's perspective is not asking us to become selfish individuals. Let's think about it. When we pursue recognition and blindly satisfy others' expectations and make choices based on others' approval, who ultimately bears the consequences of these choices? Satisfying the expectations of parents. Choosing a job one dislikes, being miserable, crying, and going to work from 9 to 5 in the future, who is that person? Satisfying the expectations of elders, hastily marrying someone you don't love and spending your life with them, who will suffer in family relationships in the future. Satisfying the expectations of leaders, working overtime, staying up late, engaging in social obligations, who will bear the physical pain and illness in the future. The consequences of certain choices are ultimately borne by someone, so that is their own issue. What kind of work to engage in is our own issue. When to get married and whom to marry are also our own issues. Finding the balance between working hard and maintaining good health is also our own issue. We should be the ones in charge of our own issues. This can be considered the ultimate form of "it's none of your business" and "it's none of my business." It is also one of the perspectives in the book that subverts people's understanding. Separation of issues. Who bears the consequences of certain choices? That belongs to them. Separate our own issues from others' issues. Do not interfere in others' issues, and there is no need to pay attention to others' interference in our own issues. That's all there is to it. Freedom means it's none of your business. For parents, learning is the child's issue. So when a child refuses to study, should we, as parents, just leave them alone? When someone extends a helping hand to us with good intentions, should we rudely push them away and say, "Don't interfere with me"? Isn't that trampling on their goodwill? Let's answer the first question. The separation of objects between parents and children. When a child doesn't love to study ultimately, they are the ones who bear the consequences. Even if parents bear the burden of the child's issues, they are still independent individuals. As parents, we cannot go to college or find a job for them, get married and have children on their behalf, live their entire lives. Even simply being there to accompany them is impossible. Similarly, children do not live to fulfill their parents' expectations. The philosopher mentions that parents always say things like, "I'm doing this for your own good," but parents' actions sometimes clearly satisfy their own ego, vanity, or desire for control. And children can perceive the deceit in them, and as a result they rebel. When faced with a child's own learning issues, it does not mean that parents should just leave them alone. Adler's proposition is to guard them based on an understanding of what the child is doing. It requires establishing a relationship of mutual trust, letting the child feel the understanding, help, and encouragement of the parents regarding learning. The most important thing is to make the child understand that it is their own issue. They have to bear all the consequences for it. And when they want to learn, parents should always be ready to provide assistance. There is a proverb that says, "We can lead a horse to water, but we cannot force the horse to drink." If the desire for independent learning is not ignited, forcing interference upon them will inevitably lead to strong resistance. This is a common situation with rebellious teenagers. So even in the close relationship between parents and children, it is still necessary to establish boundaries. Precisely because they are family, it is even more necessary to consciously separate issues. It is even more necessary to let children take responsibility for their own issues. Now, when we were children, and if parents forcefully interfered with us, for example, strongly opposing our career choice or romantic partner, father expressing anger, mother crying bitterly, or even threatening to sever the parent-child relationship, what should we do? The philosophers say that we simply don't need to care. All we can do is choose the path we believe is best, and how others evaluate our choices. That is their issue. We have no control over it. Because we care too much about others' opinions, we constantly seek approval, and we turn what should be someone else's issue into our own issue. Although it is said like this, from an emotional perspective, it still feels that such a discourse is too cold and ruthless. But in our daily lives, we constantly face such problems. If we cannot expose the lies of life, if we cannot approach problems with a teleological perspective, if we cannot achieve issue separation, then interpersonal relationships will always be complicated, and it will make avoiding problems a habit for us. This way of drawing boundaries between ourselves and others. Can it be justified morally and ethically? When someone extends a helping hand to us with goodwill, should we also rudely push them away and say, "Don't interfere with me"? Isn't that trampling on their goodwill? Faced with this question, the philosopher tells a story. When the Macedonian king Alexander was about to invade Persia, There was a chariot in the temple that was tied to the pillar by the former king Gordios. Legend has it that whoever could untie this knot would become the ruler of Asia, but no one had ever been able to do it. So how would Alexander deal with this knot? He saw that the knot was very secure, so he immediately drew his sword and cut it in half. Alexander said, "Fate is not determined by legends, but by our own efforts. I don't need the power of legends. I need to use my own sword to create my destiny." And later, he became the emperor from the Middle East to Western Asia. This Gordian knot became a famous anecdote, and it represents the entanglements in our interpersonal relationships. Using ordinary methods cannot untie it. We can only use new means to directly unfold it. The sword in Alexander's hand is the issue separation in our interpersonal relationships. The difference is that the sword cuts the knot, but issue separation does not completely sever the relationship between people. It is not the ultimate goal of interpersonal relationships, but a way to achieve good interpersonal relationships. Just like when we read a book, if our eyes are too close to the book, we can't see anything. Similarly, good interpersonal relationships also require maintaining a certain distance. Of course, the distance should not be too far, within reach but without intruding into the other person's territory. Maintaining this distance is very important. Returning to the question itself, to say that issue separation is trampling on others' goodwill is actually bound by the reciprocity mindset. If someone does something for us that we didn't expect, do we have to repay them? This is not failing their goodwill, but being bound by it. According to Adler's teleological perspective, no matter what the other person does, the decision of how we should act should be up to us. The reciprocity mindset is contradictory to issue separation. We should neither seek reciprocation nor be bound by it. In fact, there are many times when directly interfering in others' issues would be easier than issue separation. For example, a child always has trouble tying shoelaces. For a busy mother, it is easiest to just tie the shoelaces for the child. But this repeated interference prevents the child from learning anything, and in the end, they will lose the courage to face life's challenges. Adler said that children who haven't learned to face difficulties will ultimately want to avoid all difficulties. When Alexander cut the knot with his sword, many people thought that this was the wrong approach and that it should be untied by hand. Alexander misunderstood the divine realm, and many people couldn't accept it. Similarly, Adler's theories, when we first encounter them, we might find them unusually cruel, and most of them go against common sense. They deny the theory of causality, they deny psychological trauma, and they adopt a teleological perspective, believing that many troubles stem from interpersonal relationships. Adler's arguments against common sense, they sound reasonable, but they are difficult to accept. To fully comprehend Adler's ideas and apply them to every aspect of life, it takes a long time. It is a long and arduous process. And that is why we believe more in the power of his ideas, because there is no easy success, and we never believe that there are shortcuts in life. Those difficulties and challenges are the solid and sturdy stairs that elevate us step by step. Parents truly love us, and friends genuinely care for us. But if we have 10 people around us giving well-intentioned advice for our future, should we follow the advice of all 10 people? Should we fulfill the expectations of all 10 people? Isn't that deceiving ourselves and others? To satisfy everyone's expectations, in reality, we simply cannot do it. Is Adler wanting us to live selfishly? In fact, issue separation is not about being self-centered. On the contrary, those who interfere with others' issues are the ones who are self-centered. Adults who choose a life without freedom will criticize the young people who live freely in the present as hedonists. In fact, this is a lie they have fabricated to make themselves accept a life without freedom. And those who choose true freedom, if our parents are also such people, then they will encourage us to strive for true freedom. What is freedom? Freedom is no longer being afraid of being disliked. Indeed, it is painful to be disliked by others. We all want to please everyone, but that's impossible. To do so is also not freedom. To want freedom, you must pay a price. The price is not caring about others' opinions, no longer being afraid of being disliked, and no longer seeking approval from others. Live according to your own lifestyle, not to be disliked by others, but to move forward with courage, not to go with the flow, but to forge ahead. That is true freedom. We need the courage to be disliked. If we have two choices in front of us, one is a life liked by everyone, and the other is a life we like ourselves, we would choose the latter without hesitation. We care more about how we live than how others perceive us. This is what a free life means. The ultimate goal of interpersonal relationships is not about advocating individualism, nor is it about completely severing relationships between people through issue separation. Issue separation is not the ultimate goal of interpersonal relationships, but a means to achieve better interpersonal relationships. The young man argues issue separation is ultimately an idea to draw boundaries between oneself and others, but I feel that this is a self-centered and erroneous way of living. This is why Adler's ideas are referred to as individual psychology. The philosopher responds, "Indeed, the name individual psychology can be easily misunderstood. In English, individual implies indivisibility. Adler believes that the mind and body are an indivisible whole. In fact, it is quite the opposite. Those who cannot achieve issue separation and constantly seek approval from others are the ones who are extremely self-centered. Such people are most concerned about how others pay attention to them, how they evaluate themselves, and to what extent others can fulfill their desire to be recognized. Seeking recognition from others may seem like we are looking at others, but in reality, we are only focused on ourselves as perceived by others. Most people may seem to be trying their best to please others, but they are only satisfying their own desire for recognition, which is self-centered. Indeed, we are the protagonists of our own lives, and there is no problem with that. But often, we mistakenly think that we are at the center of the world, that everyone should pay attention to us, and when interacting with others, we think about what this person can bring to us. But such expectations are not always met, because others do not live to fulfill our expectations. So we often feel greatly disappointed, hurt, angry, and even humiliated. This understanding can be seen by looking at world maps from different countries. The world map we use places Asia in the center, the Americas on the right, and Europe on the left. But what about the world map used by the French? Europe is at the center, France is at the center, and the Americas and Asia are on the left and right sides respectively. When the French see our world map of Asia, they feel a great sense of imbalance, as if they have been pushed to the edge. The truth of the world is not the world map, but the globe. Every place is at the center, and at the same time, a part of the world. The same goes for us as individuals. We are not the center of the world, but a part of the whole. This may sound simple, but it carries profound meaning. Once you listen to the rest of the content, you will have a deeper understanding. Previously, we mentioned that issue separation is only the starting point of interpersonal relationships. So where does interpersonal relationships end? Adler tells us it is a sense of community, a feeling of belonging, where I can be here. When it comes to community, what do we first think of? Is it family, school, workplace? Is it hometown or country? But what Adler refers to as community even includes the entire universe and the past and future in time. The community he speaks of is an infinite concept. We are discussing real interpersonal relationships, so why bring up the universe and the future, which sound abstract? The philosopher gives an example. Some people, once they retire from their workplace, immediately lose their spirit. They are separated from the community of their workplace, lose their title, lose their business cards, become ordinary, and become anonymous ordinary people. Some people can't accept it and suddenly age rapidly. If we have the sense of community that Adler talks about, then this is simply leaving the small community of the workplace. We still belong to a larger community. The reason the universe is mentioned is to remind us not to be confined to what we see in front of us. We all have a greater sense of belonging, whether it's in a local community or a country. We can embody our own value wherever we are. The philosopher tells the young man the principle of action is, when we encounter difficulties or see no way out in our interpersonal relationships, we should first consider listening to the voice from a larger community. For example, in school, teachers are seen as absolute authorities. But if we consider it from the perspective of the larger society, we and the teachers are equals. If they make unreasonable demands on us, we can completely refuse them. Don't be confined to the relationship within the small community in front of us. In the vast world, there are more fulfilling interpersonal relationships waiting for us. What is big? When we look up at the starry sky, that is big. What is small? Searching for our own position in the starry sky is small. Perhaps when we have a vast starry sky in our hearts, when we believe that we belong to a huge community at the cosmic level, we should feel free in facing everything in life, establish equal relationships, starting from object separation, and the end point is the feeling of community or a sense of belonging to where I belong. So, how should we specifically do it? At this point, the philosopher introduces a concept called equal relationships. Adler's viewpoint is quite interesting. Let's give an example to illustrate it. In parenting and leading subordinates, we generally think there are two methods: criticism and praise. Adler's stance is neither approving criticism nor praising. Both criticism, saying you did a terrible job, and praise, saying you did a great job, conceal a hierarchical relationship of superior and subordinate. The difference between praise and criticism is just using a whip or sugar. But behind both the sugar and the whip, the purpose is to manipulate the other person. Remember what we previously mentioned? Even though people are different, they are equal. So what should we do? We can neither praise nor criticize. According to Adler, receiving praise or criticism from others to determine whether our actions are good or bad is measuring ourselves against others' standards. If we hope to receive praise, we can only conform to others' standards, hindering our own freedom. But gratitude is not an evaluation. It is purely gratitude. When people hear such words of gratitude, they clearly feel that they have made a contribution to others. Adler considers the word contribution to be very important, because only when people can feel their own value can they accept themselves, build the courage to face the fundamental issues of life. So, how can we feel our own value? It is subjectively believing that we can be of help to others and experiencing the contribution we make to the community. Establishing equal relationships must start with me, regardless of whether others cooperate. The sense of community is expressed through gratitude for existence itself. These theories sound good, but who can truly achieve them? Regarding this question, someone once challenged Adler. Adler's response was that it must start with ourselves, without considering whether others cooperate, regarding the issue of establishing equal relationships. We originally had hierarchical relationships with leaders and teachers and equal relationships with colleagues and friends. In reality, we cannot switch between the two approaches as needed. We have to choose one or the other, and the two are fundamentally incompatible. When we establish a hierarchical relationship with someone, we unconsciously approach all interpersonal relationships with a hierarchical mindset. Even if we don't understand our relationship with colleagues and friends in terms of a superior-subordinate dynamic, we may still have thoughts like, "You're better than me," or "I should listen to you." Thinking that agreements can be disregarded, equal relationships do not mean treating everyone like friends. What's important is the recognition of equality and the assertion of our own principles. Defining relationships as hierarchical and constantly seeking approval from superiors is avoiding responsibility. Why is that? Because if we completely follow the instructions of our superiors and fail in the end, we naturally blame the leader, saying, "I did what you told me to do." This is actually a lie in life. We cannot use the excuse of being unable to refuse our leaders to avoid the conflicts in interpersonal relationships. Passively accepting hierarchical relationships. We can absolutely refuse and propose better approaches. As for whether the leaders adopt them, that is their issue and doesn't require our consideration. Establishing equal relationships must start with ourselves, regardless of whether others cooperate. This firm assertion indeed shocks people. Making changes starting from ourselves truly requires great courage. To have the wisdom to completely free ourselves from complex interpersonal relationships and gain a sense of community requires three things: self-acceptance, trust in others, and contributing to others. How do we understand these? Let's take a look one by one. Self-acceptance. First of all, I believe you must have had this feeling that when you are in front of others and when you are alone, it's like two completely different states. For example, during meetings, you may hesitate to speak up, always worried that you will not say things well and be looked down upon or mocked. You may also hesitate to make small jokes in front of unfamiliar people. We don't allow ourselves to have any poor performance in front of others. We call this losing face. But when the camera switches to when we are alone, then we can freely express ourselves without any burden, singing loudly, dancing to the music or talking freely, saying things we wouldn't normally say, and that's all okay. Behind the contrast between these two different states is the inability to accept our true selves, fear of revealing our true selves in front of others. Here, we need to distinguish between self-affirmation and self-acceptance. They have essential differences. Self-affirmation means that even though I cannot do it, I still imply to myself that I can. This is actually lying to ourselves. On the other hand, self-acceptance is being honest with ourselves if we cannot do something, admitting that we cannot do it right now, and trying our best to move towards being able to do it without lying to ourselves. What matters is not what we are given, but how we make use of what we are given. We need to distinguish what cannot be changed and what can be changed. Don't focus on what cannot be changed, and instead pay attention to the parts that can be changed. That's self-acceptance. Now let's look at the second factor, trust in others. Does trusting others mean simply believing in them? Here we first need to separate the two meanings behind believing. One is trustworthiness, the other is trust. What is trustworthiness? It is like credit. It is something with conditions attached. For example, when we borrow money from a bank, we need to provide collateral. In essence, it means that I will lend you money only if you repay it. That is credit. Most people would think that the belief in credit is similar to the way we handle interpersonal relationships in our daily lives, right? However, Adler believes that trust is not the foundation of interpersonal relationships, but rather reliance. It is unconditional belief without any conditions attached. That's trust. But wouldn't it make us vulnerable to deception and betrayal? Just like how a bank would suffer losses if it indiscriminately lends money without evaluating creditworthiness? How can this work? Proposing to trust others doesn't mean seeking a moral high ground. The philosopher explains that when we trust others, we may be deceived or used, but if we put ourselves in the betrayer's position, can we continue to betray someone who unconditionally trusts us? When we experience betrayal, we do feel pain, but the happiness brought by primary interpersonal relationships is minimal. The pain caused by relationship ruptures is also minimal. It is only in the secondary interpersonal relationships that we can experience profound happiness. On the other hand, the opposite of trust is doubt. If we build interpersonal relationships based on doubt in friends, doubt in partners, doubt in family, then life will be filled with doubt, and it will be impossible to establish positive interpersonal relationships. That becomes true pain. Trust in others is the premise of building deep relationships. We all think that unconditionally trusting others will only lead to betrayal. But whether we are judged by others is their issue. We only need to consider what we should do ourselves. Of course, if we don't want to establish a relationship with someone, it is our own decision to actively sever ties with them. If we constantly worry about being deceived or harmed and are afraid to trust others, then we will never be able to establish deep relationships with anyone. When we trust others and have the courage to deepen relationships, the joy of interpersonal relationships increases, and the joy of life increases as well. When we achieve self-acceptance and offer unconditional trust to others, at that moment, others become partners. By viewing others as partners, we can find our own place within the community and gain a sense of belonging. Now let's talk about the third factor, contributing to others. Contributing to others means influencing and making contributions to others. When we think of contributions, we often think of self-sacrifice and giving to others without expecting anything in return. However, Adler opposes such behavior. Contributing to others is not about sacrificing ourselves and serving others. It is a way to experience our own value. An easy way to understand contributing to others is through the philosophy of work. It redefines work and says that work is not just a means to earn money. Through work, we contribute to others, participate in the community, feel useful to others, and thereby realize our own value. Of course, earning money is important, but as mentioned earlier, money is the inevitable reward when we create enough value. Think about the billionaires in society. They already have more money than they can spend in a lifetime. So why do they continue to work tirelessly? It's because they also contribute to others and gain a sense of belonging within the community. When we truly understand the sense of community, we should think about what we can do for people, rather than what others can do for us. The three factors we mentioned earlier, self-acceptance, trust in others, and contributing to others are all essential and interconnected. It is precisely because we accept our true selves that we can possess unconditional trust and make contributions to others. Because we accept our true selves, we are able to be non-judgmental and trust others. It is precisely because we unconditionally trust others and see them as our partners that we can contribute to them. Through contributing to others, we further understand our usefulness to others and accept our true selves, achieving self-acceptance and a sense of community. This is what Adler gives us in terms of interpersonal relationships and the ultimate cure for happiness in life. Whether we are students, professionals, or entrepreneurs, we must constantly connect ourselves with society and a larger community, contribute to others, and feel our own value within it. Our feelings of inferiority and confusion can be resolved through a sense of community. However, to truly understand Adler's ideas and change our way of life, it will be a long and challenging process that requires us to gradually experience and practice it. The world is simple, and everyone can achieve happiness. In the fifth and last conversation between the young man and the philosopher, and this time, they discuss happiness. The problem they discuss this time is happiness. The young man said, "Sir, you are attributing everything to interpersonal relationships. Seems like not everyone agrees that is the key to happiness. For example, some people aspire to achieve social and material success, while others want to develop drugs to treat cancer." The philosopher responds, saying that we need the courage to be content with ordinary things. As we mentioned earlier, obtaining a sense of community, perceiving happiness, and self-acceptance are crucial first steps. If we can be content with ordinary things, our perception of the world will be completely different. But how can we accept a life of mediocrity from the beginning? Those prominent historical figures like Napoleon, Alexander, Einstein, Martin Luther King, Socrates, and Plato all held lofty ideals in life. Although we are not geniuses, perhaps we can only choose to be ordinary. However, we still need to find a goal to strive for. Now, the philosopher says that we should be content with ordinary things. Doesn't that mean we passively give up and accept a meaningless and mediocre life? Let's use an example to illustrate this issue. The so-called lofty goal is like setting the summit as the goal when climbing a mountain. If life is about reaching the summit, then most of our time in life can be considered as being on the journey. If true life begins only when we reach the summit, then the journey before that becomes a meaningless life. If sometimes, due to accidents or illness, we fail to reach the summit or achieve the so-called goal, how should we define our lives in such situations? Imagining life as climbing a mountain, we can see our lives as a continuous line, starting from the moment of birth and drawing various curves of different sizes until reaching the peak and eventually reaching death, the end point. The philosopher argues that life, which seems like a line, is actually a series of continuous points. Life is a continuous moment, and we can only live in the present. Our lives exist only between points on the x-axis. Elder generations who fail to understand this always force young people to live life as if it were a line. In their view, attending a prestigious university, entering a good company, and having a stable family are the trajectory of a happy life. If life is a line, then planning for life is possible. However, if life is a series of continuous points, then planning for life is not only unnecessary, but fundamentally impossible. So, people who dream of becoming violinists and practice hard to achieve fame, or those who work hard and pass the bar exam to become lawyers, how could they have realized the lives they wanted without goals and plans? Aren't they all silently moving forward with the summit as their goal? But is that really the case? In every moment of their lives, these individuals actually live in the present. The person who dreams of becoming a violinist sees only the music before their eyes. Every piece, every note is their life, a continuous and ever-moving moment. And when we look back, we often realize that we have already come this far. Among those who dance to the tune of playing the violin, some may become professional violinists. Among those who dance the dance of law, some may become lawyers. Among those who dance the dance of writing, some may become writers. Of course, many others may achieve completely different outcomes. They may not become violinists, lawyers, or writers, but the act of dancing itself becomes the purpose. Nobody knows where they will end up. Certainly, because they are constantly moving, they will not remain in one place. The goals of becoming a violinist, a lawyer, or a writer can become the future of their lives. Immersed in the performance of the violin, dedicatedly studying law, or earnestly writing, these individuals are living their own present lives. We often compare life to a journey. What is the purpose of a journey? If we want to travel to Egypt and see the Great Pyramids, do we rush to the pyramids as quickly as possible and then hastily return? No. The journey begins the moment we step out of our homes. Setting off towards the destination, every moment of the journey is part of the travel experience. The most important thing is that in the present moment, we can only see the present. Imagine standing on a theater stage with all the lights on, allowing us to see the entire audience. But if there is a strong spotlight directed towards us, we can't even see the front row of spectators. Our lives are the same. It is because we direct the dim and faint light towards our entire lives that we see the past and the future. But if we direct the spotlight to the present moment, we can only see the now. Yes, that's what Adler wants to tell us. We need to live the present moment more seriously. If we think we can see the past and predict the future, it only proves that we are not living in the present moment seriously. Focusing on the present moment requires us to do what we can with seriousness and care. For example, for a student who wants to get into a good university, how can they live the present moment seriously? The exam is something that will happen in the distant future, but progress needs to be made every day. Solving a practice problem, memorizing a word, there are things we can do today. This very day exists for this purpose, and not just for the distant exam. There is no need to look at where we want to reach in the form of a line, but to focus on how to spend the present moment. The philosopher even says that it's okay to not have goals. Life is simple, serious, and does not need to be profound. In the last conversation, the philosopher tells the young man, the biggest lie in life is getting tangled up in the past, focusing on the future, and constantly neglecting the present moment. That's the biggest lie we tell ourselves about our lives. For the present moment, the past and the future do not exist. So let's only talk about the now. What determines our lives is neither yesterday nor tomorrow, but this very moment. Everyone can break free from the three major constraints of their past, interpersonal relationships, and their future. All we need is the courage and the decision to change. As long as I change, the world will change. The so-called world is always the world in our own eyes. No one else can change it for us. Only we can change it. Every person can attain happiness without exception. The world is actually simple, and our lives are the same. Thank you for watching.